of years ago, the inhabitants of London turned the place into an important industrial, commercial and financial centre. And at the same time, they wanted to let their hair down and be entertained. In the Middle Ages, they couldn't do this because what went on in the city was strictly controlled by the city fathers and the Lord Mayor. So they sneaked over and set up places of entertainment south of the river, where the authorities couldn't touch them. These street names give us a clue about the kind of amusements that used to go on in this entertainment hotspot. People would have been spilling out of the taverns, all placing bets on one of the many animal contests that would have been held. Bear baiting, bull baiting and cockfighting were all hugely popular. The South Bank was also where many of London's first theatres sprang up in the 16th century. They too had to be outside the city limits because of the effect they might have had on public morals. In 1599, a company of players including Richard Burbage and William Shakespeare put up the money to build what became the #1 theatre on Bankside, the Globe. This is actually the third Globe to be built here. The first one was about 200 metres that way. And the area then was all marshland, so they had to build a platform of lime and brick to put the thing on. Now, it's right across from the city, and people would come across here by boat because the only crossing was London Bridge, and that's half a mile downstream. It's a mile round trip. So they'd run up a flag to show, like that red one at the top there, to show that a play was about to begin, and then people would get in their boats and come across. And there was also colour coding. So there was a black flag if it was a tragedy, a white flag for comedy, and a red flag for history. When they rebuilt the Globe, they did their very best to recreate the original, including the thatched roof, which was actually the reason why the first one was destroyed. They were simulating firing a cannon on the stage, and as a special effect, they fired a real cannon from the heavens above the stage, and they fired it over the audience towards the river. They didn't use a cannonball, and they didn't use much gunpowder, but the wadding caught fire, set fire to the roof, and the whole place burnt to the ground. Luckily, everyone escaped unscathed, apart from one member of the audience. His breeches caught fire, and they had to put him out with a bottle of beer. Anyway, after the Great Fire of 1666, no thatched roofs were allowed in London at all. And this modern Globe is the single exception to that rule. Isn't it wonderful? This trapdoor was one of various features installed in the original Globe. They really wanted to surprise and amaze their audiences, and the effects had to be good, because if they were feeble or if the sword fights were no good, they'd get heckled by all this audience crowded round. And all these things had to be done on the cheap. For example, these wonderful marble pillars are actually tree trunks painted to look like marble. It's all a great con. They feel solid enough. The whole of the stage is designed as a sort of mini cosmos. Down there, it's hell. I know, I've been there. Up here, it's the earth, and you see it's all painted in sort of greens and browns, earthy colours. And look at the ceiling. Wonderful cosmic ceiling, with all those symbols and moons and things floating about. And quite often they would fly in actors on ropes as gods and angels and so on. But of course, it's quite tough for a modern actor, because this place now attracts both audiences and actors from all over the world. And when the actors come here, they're used to all sorts of modern equipment, but here they have to adapt to an Elizabethan stage. Now, Nick, you're an actor. Are you playing here something?
I'm playing Antony and Cleopatra.
That's more than half the play, isn't it?
Antony is 2/3 of the play. He goes on and on and on. I think second to Iago, it's the largest you can do.
What's this place like compared with a normal theatre?
The difference is, I think, more from the audience's perspective than the actor's perspective. As you come into this space, there is nothing between you and them. It's a shared experience.
You can actually touch one another.
You can touch one another. They lean on the side of the stage, and actors fall down and they'll be touched. The audience will go, oh, like this, and they will touch them. There's nothing to separate you from that. So it's like a much more shared experience. It's very intimate.
And presumably they throw things at you from time to time.
Not yet. I'm not ruling it out.
And you, of course, there are no lights, are there? I mean, I hadn't thought of that. It's daylight, so that...
It's daylight. You can see everybody. You can see people you know.
Right, so with the spotlights in your eyes, you can't see the audience.
Well, perhaps you'll see the first few rows, but you won't be able to see anybody. You're
Right.
blinded. You're separated.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful, invigorating experience. And the dynamic of the building and the wood and the acoustics. It's like nothing I've ever experienced. So for me, I've played an RSC and NT. I think this is the most vigorous, alive experience of playing Shakespeare
Really?
I've had. It's
And the
very-
acoustics, you don't need microphones or anything. You can speak straight to the top.
Yes, you can.
The
You
gods.
have to be clear. But certainly you can. You can be quite intimate.
I have to say that being up there, you have got a tremendous sense of, you start projecting and your voice, you can hear your voice.
Beautiful feeling, isn't it?
Yes, lovely.
And to know that there's no metal in any of this, that it's all Dowling and old green oak.
Wonderful.
And that you're experiencing a time warp. It's an Elizabethan feeling. First time I came on the stage, I became very tearful. It was such a profound experience of the source of our most beautiful literature.
Theatre-going has gone from strength to strength in London, and the West End theatres now attract 12 million people a year. The Victorian period saw a huge boom in the number of theatres being built, but they didn't tend to last very long because all the wooden stage machinery was a huge fire risk. There was a clear demand for finding a new way of operating things backstage that wasn't quite so dangerous, and the answer was the River Thames. Encouraged by the top engineers of the day, several Victorian theatres got connected to the London Hydraulic Power Company's network. Their power station in Wapping was built in 1890. They pumped water through 180 miles of pipes with a pressure of 700 pounds per square inch, providing power to venues all over the West End. And they're still using hydraulic power today, here at the Lyric Theatre. Because of the danger of fire, every theatre had to be fitted with a fireproof safety curtain like this one, which, according to the Lord Chamberlain's regulations, still to this day has to be raised and lowered at least once during each performance. Now, the problem with that is that this particular curtain weighs 12 tons, so lowering it and raising it, well, it might be difficult apart from this. All the stagehand has to do is that. And that lets the water in, and the high-pressure water in these pipes pushes up hydraulic rams like pistons, and the pistons raise the curtain as though it was made of plywood. Isn't that fantastic? So, how does hydraulics work? Well, have a look at this. Suppose I want to lift this great heavy white stage here with this actor on it, and I can't possibly do that myself. I'm going to use hydraulics to help me. So I've got two cylinders full of water like this and connected at the bottom with a hollow pipe full of water. This one is 3 inches in diameter, and this one is 6 inches in diameter, so this one has 4 times the surface area of that one. That means that if I push down on here, I'll be pushing water down here through the pipe and up into here. But if I push down with a force of, say, 1 kilogram, that's going to be pushing up on this side with a force of 4 kilograms because the surface area is that much bigger. So the pressure is pushing up over a bigger area. On the other hand, you see it doesn't go up very far because if I push down maybe 20 centimetres here, it's only gone up 5 centimetres on this side. So what the hydraulics does is to multiply the force while actually reducing the distance travelled. And that's how you can lift a heavy actor on a piece of stage or 12 tons of safety curtain. The Victorians knew that the London hydraulic power was not entirely reliable, and so they had to install a backup system. And this is it. And basically, you have to turn the wheel around like this, and you can see that in the middle there, the pistons are going up and down and pumping the water. Now, it's pretty hard work, even though I'm not pumping any water. And they tell me that to operate it properly, you'd need 12 people working in shifts to move all that water to lift those tons and tons of safety curtain. Anyway, I'm glad to say that the main motor seems to be working today. Whew. This revolving stage was one of those innovations that was brought about by the use of electricity. In this case, the stage was powered by this electric motor here, and to get that working, that's a direct current motor. They had to rectify the current, and here is a mercury rectifier, and I'm standing well back, and this converts the ordinary alternating current of the mains into a direct current to run that motor. Because they were so reliable and easy to use and maintain, mercury rectifiers were the most popular way of converting alternating current into direct current until the 1960s, when they were replaced by more modern electronics. The Lyric is one of very few theatres that still use hydraulic power at all, and now they pump the water from their own tank using an electric motor. So even though it cut down massively on the amount of work needed backstage, hydraulic power was soon outmoded by electric stage machinery, which provided much speedier and more efficient mechanisms for today's spectacular special effects. So, after only a few years in the limelight, it was curtains for hydraulic power in London's West End. The Victorians were responsible for changing the face of entertainment in London. Once they got their transport sorted out and there were buses pulled by horses, loads of people began to go out in the evening. In fact, it became respectable, the idea of nightlife. They built loads of theatres and music halls, but one Victorian venue stands out among all the others: the Albert Hall. The hall was built after the Great Exhibition of 1851. Prince Albert wanted to bring permanent facilities to the area, not just so people could have fun, but also to exhibit the latest discoveries in science and technology. The building is dedicated to the arts and sciences, which is why this terracotta frieze shows such a range of activities. From the first ever gramophone concert to a full-scale marathon, the hall certainly lived up to its aim of entertaining the public with science and spectacle. But there was one big problem. From the very first concert, it was clear that the acoustics were terrible. The reverberations were so bad that a conductor remarked the hall was the only place where a British composer could be sure of hearing his work twice. It's all because the Albert Hall has an elliptical shape, so the sound is all focused on certain hotspots. It took until the 1960s to get this problem sorted out, and it was these, which look like giant mushrooms or flying saucers, that solved the sound difficulties. Marvellous. Of course, not all Victorians went to grand venues like the Albert Hall to enjoy themselves, and the travelling fun fair has been providing entertainment for people from all social classes for centuries. Early fairs were really just a few amusements to entertain people trading at markets, but soon they included performing animals, fortune tellers, and illusions performed by dedicated showmen. The Carter family have been restoring all these wonderful rides to their former glory since the 1970s, and they travel around London and Berkshire every summer. They unfold their traditional fare in a park or field for just a few magical days, and this year they're making it even more authentic. This wonderful engine was built in 1913 and throughout the First World War hauled heavy loads around London. Then in the 30s it was bought by a showman who dressed it all up beautifully, painted it, polished the brass, took it to the fairgrounds, and he renamed it the King George VI. When it was just a traction engine, it used to pull things along the roads, but then in the fairground they wanted it to power rides, and so what they did to convert it was to put a dynamo on the front here, and this was powered by a belt from the flywheel back there. And with this dynamo they could generate 110 volts of DC electricity. They used the electricity to light lights all around the place and also to drive the rides. Have a look at this one. Now, Joby, you don't still use the engine to power this ride, do you?
Yes, we do. And we've been using it all season.
Fantastic.
And it pulls the loads on the roads, moves them along like it would have. And at the weekend, you put the belt on and it generates power for the ride, just as it did.
Amazing. Does it run smoothly? Does it run all weekend?
Yeah, fantastic.
No problems?
You have to stop every 4 hours to oil up the crucial parts you can't get to when the motion's turning.
Right.
So they know what they're doing, so it takes them about 2-3 minutes, and that can be the time it takes to load people on anyway.
Right.
So Bob's your uncle, you carry on, and it runs fantastically without any problems.
And what's this particular ride called?
This is called the Ark, but it's been known since Teddy Andrews bought it in 1938 when it was 4 years old. He even renamed it the Jungle Thriller.
And why jungle? Was that a sort of way of drawing people in?
Jungle's always been a very popular theme, because you imagine back in the early part of this century, how many people had seen a jungle? How many people had seen an animal in colour? This was where people went to see things as near to life as they possibly could.
Right. So, Joby, this is a carousel, yes?
Gallopers. We don't like to call it carousel. That's what they call them on the continent.
Ah, OK. And is there any difference otherwise?
The difference is gallopers go around clockwise.
Yeah.
All to do with the way a lady sat side saddle, she'd sit facing this way.
Right.
Which would be the same way she'd be facing in the direction of the road would go. We drive on the left-hand side.
OK.
Now in France, Germany, America, they drive on the other side, therefore they sat side saddle facing the other way, so the horses went the other way. They call them carousel, we call them gallopers.
Gallopers,
Yes.
OK. And what powers all this lot?
The steam engine in the centre.
In the middle. Can we go and have a look?
Yes, certainly.
When was this engine built?
1895 it was built.
So it's 115 years old, 111 years old, and still running.
Yep, still going on
Fantastic.
strong.
Can I put a bit more coal in?
Of course, yeah.
OK. I'm going to get dirty hands, aren't I? Oh,
Yes.
well, can't be helped. Bit in there, bit in there. That ought to do. OK. So, can I have a ride?
Yes.
Which horse would you recommend?
I think you should go on my son's horse, John, on the outside.
On the outside. OK, thanks. Get ready to power her up. Oh, it's wonderful. I haven't been on one of these for years. What I love about the gallopers is how they're all out of sync, so they're all going up and down at different times. The fairgrounds were the beginning of what has become the great theme parks of today. But perhaps more important than that, they were the first places in London where you could see moving pictures on a big screen. So they were the precursors of the multi-million-pound cinema industry. People flocked to see these new motion pictures. Sometimes they just showed day-to-day events like people going to work. But nevertheless, they were an instant hit. London was the heart of the new motion picture business. This is Portobello Road on Notting Hill. Back in 1910, it was one of the most fashionable shopping streets in London, which may have been one reason why it was one of the first roads to be electrified. So when the last plot was snapped up to make a purpose-built cinema, they called the cinema the Electric, and it's right here. Because this was the first purpose-built cinema, the architect had to rely on previous experience of music halls. So essentially this is a music hall. Look at that wonderful vaulted ceiling with all the gorgeous gilt decoration. Pity about the modern lighting rig, but you can't have everything. That ceiling must have made the piano sound lovely, because of course in the old days it was silent movies and somebody playing the piano in the front. But then talking movies came in, and it was a disaster because the acoustics are terrible and nobody could hear what the actors are saying. So to try and soak up some of the excess reverberation, they put in these soft panels. Otherwise, the whole place has been restored to its former glory, including this lovely moulding, some of it gilded, some of it plain, and most of the walls painted a pale cream colour, because in those days it was thought most improper for people of opposite sexes to spend the evening together in a darkened room. When the Electric was first built, it must have been a real flea pit because there were 365 seats in it. It's now become a luxury cinema. Just look at this, leather upholstered armchairs, very, very comfortable. Wonderful footrests, look at that. Even space to walk past the end, you don't have to move if somebody comes into the row. And then a great tray here with, I suppose, popcorn, sandwiches, a wine cooler. I don't seem to have a bottle in mine, I'm not quite sure why. There are even sofas at the back there. It is truly amazing. However, they did have one technical problem. You see, the screen there is surrounded by a beautiful gilt picture frame. And as cinema developed, the format changed and the pictures got wider and wider, and they needed to be on wide screens. And here there was no way of incorporating a wide screen because that gilt frame is listed and they couldn't touch it. However, when it was restored a few years ago, they found a really ingenious way of getting around that. Just have a look at this. This 2-ton mechanism is the only one of its kind in the world, and it's a really impressive feat of engineering. After the curtains open, the screen emerges from inside the picture frame and expands sideways as it's stretched across aluminium tubing to accommodate films in a widescreen format. Now, there's something really rather special on today. OK, run the movie. London's entertainment began here on the South Bank, and it's all coming back here again, because now there are world-famous attractions like the National Theatre, the Royal Festival Hall, and one of the most popular of all of them, the British Airways London Eye. As the tallest observation wheel in the world, the London Eye dwarfs many of the capital's other famous landmarks. It's nearly 3 times as tall as Tower Bridge, and 4 times wider than the Dome of St Paul's. Doug, you're the engineer responsible for making sure this thing works. Now, it looks like a great big bicycle wheel. Is it as simple as that?
It's almost as simple as that, yeah. If you imagine a bicycle wheel with spokes, then this is what you've got.
Right, only it's a bit bigger.
It's a bit bigger.
When I first heard about the London Eye, I thought it was going to be a complete disaster. But ever since it went up, it's been one of my favourite London landmarks. It's not difficult to see why this is such a popular tourist attraction. Just look at that amazing view. The whole city, Palace of Westminster, Buckingham Palace, and over the top of that on the horizon, Windsor Castle, 25 miles away. The South Bank is a far cry from the way it used to be with all that bear baiting, but people still come here to see the city itself going past. London has become the star attraction.